Today's experiment was inspired by spun cotton, but instead of making the dapper little figures I've been seeing scroll by my feed, I wanted to try something a little bit different. I wanted to take the technique and tweak it a little bit and see if we can cast a mold with it. This project concept actually stems from some of the comments left on my squishy latex brain video a while back, where I layered liquid latex into the brain mold and then filled it with a squishy urethane foam. My hope is that by using cotton, the resulting shell that comes out of the mold will end up being like a more detailed paper mache, so I can still hot glue to it, paint it, cut it, but it also won't rip by hand, and I should be able to crumple it. I decided to run a small-scale test first to see if cotton could actually hold its shape once dry. I pulled out one of the few molds in my collection that I didn't make myself, a simple gem mold in the shape of a rupee. At the time, I found the 3D print lines the seller left behind pretty annoying, but in this case, they're perfect. They'll help me to determine just how much detail the cotton can pick up. I tested 2 different sets of materials. First, I unraveled a drugstore cotton ball and painted it into the mold using a 1-to-1 mixture of white school glue and water. Alternatively, I tried separating the layers of cotton batting and using PVA glue in my water mixture. Unsurprisingly, the batting and PVA glue were much easier to work with. The process is similar to paper mache, but because cotton fibers are so much smaller than paper strip, I was hoping they could capture finer details. At first, the fibers kept pulling out of the mold, but eventually I found that if I painted the mold with glue first, then carefully pressed the cotton in for the first layer, I could layer more on top easily, which eventually came together to form a structure that held itself in place. I made sure to add enough layers of batting so that when I took it out of the mold, I wouldn't be left with any thin spots or holes. Once both tests were dry, I popped them out and was thrilled with the results. The cotton held an impressive amount of detail while remaining sturdy, lightweight, and paintable. With that success, I was ready to tackle the brain mold. The process was the same as with the smaller molds, though the brain required more glue than I was expecting. And the cotton has so much absorbent surface area that drying took a bit of time, though a hairdryer helped speed things along. Once I finally got it fully dry, I was astounded. It captured so much detail, exactly what I was hoping for. And after a quick trim, I was left with a perfect surface to build on. I could start adding the finishing touches. I layered a few wires onto the surface with rhinestone glue, trying to loosely copy the cerebral veins, before adding more batting, which helped adhere the structure to the flat canvas, as well as brought back some fuzziness, and helped obscure the veins but kept them visible since the layer of cotton was so thin. My reference for this project was a mold-ripened cheese, so I loosely emulated that vibe with a mix of watered-down fabric paint, model train foliage stuck on with craft glue, and extra batting to enhance that fuzzy, moldy effect. Since I'm not trying to represent something real, I had to use a combination of reference photos from bread mold to beer-washed cheese. I slowly built up the bloom on my brain by alternating fabric paint and more batting. As with many decorative finishes, realism comes from layering. And of course, what project isn't complete without a dirt layer to help separate the subject from the background? Then, while everything was drying, it was a perfect time for me to pull out my vintage tape writer, which I actually generally prefer over a more modern label maker because I love how tactile the labels end up, and I think that'll be a lovely counter to the fuzzy bloom. And then, after a few more layers of paint and some final dry time, I was left with some brain rot of my very own. Thanks for taking the time to experiment with me, and feel free to drop any questions you might have in the comments. Follow along for more macabre crafts, and I'll see you next time. Now that I've popped this free, I'm ready to give it a stress test. I'm gonna try and rip it and crumple it up and see what happens. It can rip in the really thin areas, but in all the areas that are built up enough so that you can't see through them, it's surprisingly sturdy. So I'm super happy with the outcome of this experiment, and I can't wait to see what else I can do with it. If you have any suggestions, drop those in the comments too.